This is Sarah, and I just want to take a moment to speak to you about this week's sponsor, Favor. Favor Inc. is a statewide family-led nonprofit 501c3 organization that is committed to empowering families as advocates and partners in improving educational and health outcomes for our children. Favor is the Connecticut state organization of the Federation of Families for Children's Mental Health. Favor offers a single place for families with children who have medical, mental, emotional, and behavioral health challenges to find information, assistance, and training. To find out more about Favor, please go to favor-ct.org. We are grateful for our opportunity to work with Favor as a sponsor, and now on to the rest of the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Caregiver Chronicles. My name is Sarah, and today I have Nancy Poland with me, who is an author of the books Dancing with Lewy and Remarkable Caregiving, and she is also a family caregiver. Hi, Nancy. How are you today?
Hi, Sarah. I'm great. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. I am so excited to talk to you. Dancing with Lewy is about Lewy body dementia, your experiences with Lewy body dementia with your dad.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really looking forward to talking about that. However, before we do that, would you like to further introduce yourself to my audience?
I would love to. So I've been a caregiver in various situations like many of us. I had a premature son I took care of. We were foster parents for a while. I helped with my grandparents, but what really struck me, what I wrote my book about, was caring for my parents as they got older. And my mom, she had various ailments, but ultimately she died from kidney cancer. But then meanwhile, during this whole journey, my dad was diagnosed with dementia. And it was a difficult journey. We'll talk about that. And, when it was over, I just thought, I have got to write this story. And there's so many people out there like me. And, my specific story is a daughter taking care of her dad, which is a special challenge. But there's so many people who just need encouragement and hope, and to know there's others like that out there. So I have since then become an author and just try to share my story with people like I'm doing today.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for taking time to share your story. We both have that in common, that we've both cared for multiple people throughout our family, children with special needs or with different needs, grandparents, and my parents are still pretty young and healthy, so I'm grateful for that. But there is going to be that day where I take on that role, and you had to take on that role. We haven't covered Lewy body dementia, so can you talk about that a little bit?
Definitely. I'll read you a little bit of the technical piece of it. This is recorded in my book, Dancing with Lewy. In the early 1900s, while researching Parkinson's disease, the scientist Frederick H. Lewy discovered abnormal protein deposits that disrupt the brain's normal functioning. And they're ultimately called the Lewy body proteins. And they're in an area of the brainstem where they deplete the neurotransmitter dopamine. So it causes Parkinson's-like symptoms. But as we'll talk about this, the manifestation of the disease is somewhat different from Parkinson's. But, they are finding there are some similarities, both Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease in Lewy body dementia.
Yes. And I find, and it's super important to say that Lewy body is not a type of Alzheimer's. It's a type of dementia. And I just want to cover again because again, half of my audience is here for Alzheimer's. The other half is here for autism. And for my audience who's here for autism, who might not understand this, or anybody who's new who's listening, dementia isn't necessarily always Alzheimer's. All Alzheimer's is dementia, but dementia isn't always Alzheimer's. There's various, I think that the latest is like 72 causes of dementia, if I'm not mistaken, different things that can cause dementia. And Lewy body is the second most common cause of dementia to Alzheimer's. So, I don't know, are you aware of those facts? Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I'm also a volunteer community educator for the Alzheimer's Association. So we cover that a lot in the presentations that we do for them. And I describe it like dementia is a ball. And, there's footballs and baseballs and basketballs. So the different types of dementia, of which Alzheimer's is the most common, is a dementia. But there's Lewy body and frontal lobe dementia and all these other many different kinds. So yeah, you're spot on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I just appreciate you clarifying that and helping me explain that, because sometimes it's such a complicated thing to explain to people who don't have that background or that training to understand. So can you talk about what Lewy body looks like in a person? Like Lewy body disease, what it looks like.
Yes. So it starts out as, dementia symptoms. Like with my dad, he was actually first diagnosed with vascular dementia, which is like little mini strokes in the brain. And he had the most trouble with what they call executive functioning at first. So it was trying to do his checkbook, trying to figure numbers. Things like putting together a flashlight got confusing. This was a man who'd owned his own business for years, a construction business. He calculated jobs. He had people work for him. And as he got into his late 70s, some of these started, he was somewhat forgetful, but more in the sense like he might lose a toolbox, or he might, like, he forgot a jacket once, good jacket my mother just bought him. But he always knew us. So as he went on, his gait became very uneven. He had more trouble talking, and as time went on, he fell a couple times, and he couldn't walk very well. And we had to put him in a nursing home. And by the time he passed away, he was like, they called him a functional quadriplegic. His brain wasn't able to tell his limbs to move. Even though he could technically move his arms and legs, his brain just wouldn't make the connections. And there's other things like drooling and nose running and things that are kind of gross, but they immediately said his pattern was not like Alzheimer's. So, he was really relieved. Oh, I don't have Alzheimer's. He called it something else, but so it's kind of like Parkinson's, where they become very stiff in gait. But then the other big hallmark is hallucinations. And he didn't tell us a lot of hallucinations. Once he told me he saw an angel in the corner of his room. And once he told me he had seen me, I come to visit him, and I was in a dress, a flower dress, which I didn't even wear at that point in time. So I think he had some hallucinations that either he didn't tell us, or by the time he had them, he couldn't talk about them. So yeah, so it's just a very progressive kind of neurological disease, but different, like from some of the other dementias.
Yeah. And I would agree with that. As, I had cared for a few, not as many as Alzheimer's, but quite a few patients with Lewy body disease. And, one of the key things that was different was, like you said, the hallucinations. And the hallucinations would vary in intensity. And one difference I personally noticed with most of my Lewy body residents was they would sometimes know, like they would know, and I don't know if this validates your experience, but they would know, I'm seeing a man on my bed, and I know he's actually not there.
Yeah.
I know you don't see him. It's my bleeping disease, they would say. Or, they would know that they are having the hallucinations, where a dementia patient oftentimes, or an Alzheimer's patient oftentimes would not know that their hallucination, if they were having them, isn't real.
Because they do seem to keep some brain awareness for quite a while, and it just depends. I'm sure you heard Robin Williams had Lewy body dementia, and it wasn't diagnosed. Similar to my dad, he wasn't diagnosed till a few months before he died. Robin Williams wasn't diagnosed until after he passed away. And I had listened to his the little movie they made about him. And part of what they said, he was so intelligent that his brain found ways to work around some of the protein deposits. So I think that can happen, and I've read other things that says neurologically, and I'm not a doctor or a scientist, but so that's why they might have good days and bad days, and maybe that's why they're aware that they're hallucinating. Part of their brain knows reality, but then, this other part of their brain is seeing things. So, it's kind of a baffling disease, and they seem to get better and worse. And, whereas Alzheimer's patients, even though they might have good days and bad days, they tend to decline progressively.
Yeah, absolutely. I, again, as someone who cared for people in a professional setting with Lewy body, not in a personal setting,
right?
I can say that my experiences, I do agree with that. So can you talk about how Lewy body is different than Parkinson's? Because I know there's similarities, but obviously it's two different diseases. But
Right.
talk about, like, if someone's diagnosed with Parkinson's and maybe they really do have Lewy body, what would be some differences that you might want to look for?
So with Parkinson's, a lot of times you have the tremors and the shaking, and typically that doesn't happen. My understanding is with Lewy body, more affected is like the gait, the walking gait. I think there's maybe some like misdiagnosis at first. Maybe they think they have Parkinson's. Like with my dad, they didn't, and he had multiple doctors, but they didn't diagnose him with Lewy body till towards the end. So it's just really important, I think, for the medical community to recognize some of the more subtle differences. Again, the hallucinations. People with Parkinson's can have hallucinations, but it's much more common, I think, with Lewy body. And I think they're finding there's even Parkinson's with Lewy body and Parkinson's without Lewy body. So it's you really need a clinical diagnosis.
Yeah, but there's always things to look for. And again, this is definitely something, if your loved one is diagnosed with a type of dementia or Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, you might want to further investigate and see if there's those, Lewy body, see if the Lewy body presents in the brain.
Yep.
Just
a note, Sarah, I cannot agree with you more. I mean, so my dad died 10 years ago, and even now the internet is so much more robust. But when he told us, when the doctor said vascular dementia, we just kind of rode with that. And I don't know why it didn't occur to myself, or like I have 3 sisters, and one has a background in this type of thing. Why we didn't, do more research, or why we didn't, get another neurological workup, and kind of that point as well, it doesn't really matter. It's like either he had a stroke or something and he can't walk, but it would have prepared us. I mean, I was just totally unprepared for this dad who ended up in a nursing home, unable to walk or talk or anything. Yeah. I mean, it was just a horrible shock to us. So that's why I think, it's so important to get smart yourself, and then, just be really, really an advocate for your loved one with the medical system.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And I think that I think that sometimes rolling with the doctors, sometimes, and I'm not bashing doctors because I know they study hard and I know they're trying their best. And I know that sometimes the easiest answer is the answer. Sometimes it's harder to take that next step. So like you said, we as family caregivers, we as their advocates have to look and take that next step. I also personally feel like there is just not enough awareness about Lewy body disease as there is with Alzheimer's and other types of dementia. I just personally feel like this is something that I've only learned about within the past, I would say, 6 years or so. Yeah. And I was a healthcare worker in a long-term care facility caring for people with various types of dementia. Yeah. So would you agree with that? And what do you think could be done?
I definitely agree. And I even look at the healthcare system. Like I was getting my teeth cleaned and I said to my, the lady who's cleaning my teeth, I'm like, do you guys get any training for dementia? She said, oh, not really. I learned by doing that. Some people, might be more resistant to that. His eye doctor, he had glaucoma, but, did she recognize more? She knew he had dementia, but, there's so much education to be done, even in the medical field. And, you take your loved one and you go yourself and you see a doctor for 15 minutes. And, and they did their very best. We had a full neurological workup. And at that time, they did the MRI and everything. And, and now, post-COVID, I'm sure you've noticed the medical system is just stressed.
Yep.
They're just over. I have my nurse practitioner I love. She just left. She said to pursue other opportunities. Last time I saw her, I thought, this woman is just stressed. So, you just, politely, you have to work with the medical system. You have to push. You have to make appointments. You have to learn yourself. And that's why I love working with the Alzheimer's Association to just really help educate people.
Exactly. And I agree with that. And I think it's important too when you're doing the research yourself. I just want to reiterate this because this is so important today because there's so many people who did their own research.
Oh yeah.
And it takes them down a rabbit hole of misinformation. And we need to be very careful when we're doing our own research that we're getting it from accredited sources like the Alzheimer's Association, like Johns Hopkins University,
Yeah.
like the Mayo Clinic, not from your cousin's brother's uncle's stepson's neighbor's friend on YouTube who what seems normal but wears a tinfoil hat when nobody's looking or whatever, you know what I mean? And we're not, we're not purchasing snake oil and things like that as our cures for these things, because realistically there is no cure for Lewy body. Is that correct?
Right. That's right. There's no cure for any dementias right now. And you're exactly right. I mean, I could have went to the website and read, oh, he's got date and he's got this now. He must have Parkinson's. I mean, I'm not a doctor. I didn't go to medical school for all these years to learn this. I mean, the best thing that we did was, I think we put our heads together, my sister and especially my mom, what kind of symptoms was he having? I mean, again, sleep disorders, again, that's a huge sign of Lewy body dementia. We haven't mentioned that yet, but my mother said he'd thrash around and she didn't even sleep with him anymore because she's afraid that he would hurt her. Boy, so we said, sleep disorder. And again, he couldn't put together the flashlight. And we don't have a very big family. There's not lots of grandchildren. There's about half a dozen grandchildren, but he would get mixed up what grandchild belonged to what, daughter, so that kind of thing. So we put together this list. We also said he could still sing, especially like hymns. He could still sing hymns. The man had an impeccable sense of direction. I don't think he ever lost that. So, we said, what couldn't he do and what could he do, and brought it to the doctor. And I think that's really important to family. Take notes and try to think of the symptoms. So I'm not trying to interpret it myself. I'm saying, here, practitioner, here's what we're seeing.
Yeah. And I agree with that. I think sometimes that data to bring back to the doctor pushes them that step further as, hey, wait a minute, half of this rules this other thing out. And, again, like I said, there's no cure for Lewy body.
No.
Are there treatments? Are there medication treatments or not yet?
Yeah. So from what I've been listening to and reading and this is true with Alzheimer's too, that there's no cure, and there's even maybe some new medications with Alzheimer's, but they can treat the symptoms. So they can treat the sleep disorder. They can treat, some of the different, maybe they're having aches and pains, or maybe they're having, stomach issue, whatever it is, so they can treat a lot of those things, which really helps. And again, that's why it's so important. You don't just say, oh, there's no cure for it. Well, there's not, but, we can help people have a better quality of life.
Yes.
We all hope there'll be more and more answers as more research is performed for these different dementias. But for now, you've just got to help your loved one, live the best life they can.
Absolutely. I agree with that. And that, and that comes with that full cup philosophy. That comes with that full cup philosophy of caregiving, where you're taking care of someone's, not just their physical needs, but their social needs, their emotional needs, their spiritual needs, and yours as well as the caregiver.
Oh, yes, definitely.
So, and that kind of comes with quality of life. You can't just say basic needs are met, quality of life is great. Because that's not quality of life, that's primal needs. And then to really make the quality of life, you've got to have the emotional, the social, the spiritual aspect, however that may look for you, because that may look different for every single person, and that's fine too. So I'm really loving hearing this. Is there anything else about Lewy body that you want to talk about before we start talking about your books?
Well, it's devastating. I was listening to a podcast the other day and about Lewy body, and the woman was saying, I mean, it's just a devastating disease. People might become more aggressive more often than with Alzheimer's. They might be acting out. I mean, they're frustrated. My dad was frustrated. Who wouldn't be frustrated if he was in the nursing home? He was in there for 14 months, where he had to be toileted and lifted into bed, and who wouldn't be frustrated? So, and sometimes they do have to use some of these drugs, and it's disturbing to the families, but you have to work with the medical system, and you also have to be an advocate.
Yes.
And then, as you mentioned, you have to take care of yourself. I got very depressed between the time my mom died first, and I had always kind of struggled with depression, but I kind of felt I could manage it. But I was just crying all the time between my mom dying and this dementia issue. And then, we have a teenage son at home, and I was working quite a bit. I actually went to my doctor and started on antidepressants. And like you said, you've got to find ways to take care of your own mental, spiritual, physical health as a caregiver.
Exactly. So that actually brings me to another question I have for you. What is your favorite self-care activity?
My favorite stuff, well, I love to read. I'm kind of a ferocious reader, and I try not just to read self-help books. I try to read some fiction novels or historical novels. My husband and I, he's retired and I'm getting close. We're kind of at the age where we'll watch detective shows at night. But, just walking or listening to podcasts or reading, just sometimes you just need alone time. And like I said, not always, I'm kind of have a little business here, not always focus on that, but just kind of fun things. And with COVID, it's definitely been a challenge. So just to really find ways to, focus on some of the positive things and some other great things people are doing.
Exactly. Well, I think the most positive thing to come out of COVID is more outdoor dining.
Definitely.
I mean, nobody can disagree with that, and I hope that never goes away.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So that's got to be the most positive thing to come out of it, and we should keep it. Also, I do think the work from home, the more work from home opportunities that have come up, and things like that have been positive. So if I'm going to look on a bright side, Caregiver Chronicles came from COVID.
Oh, yeah. And my second book did. So it's like, what else
there
I
you
do? I
go.
can write a book.
Well, there you go. And they're always good. There's always a silver lining. There's always a positive. So I love that philosophy as self-care. And I also love like the taking a walk, listening to a podcast, watching a TV show. We hear all the time, oh, TV is not good for you. Well, if you like watching a detective show or true crime or whatever, sit down and watch it. If it relaxes you, if it makes you feel good, do it. Maybe it doesn't make your neighbor feel good and she needs to do journaling or whatever. That's fine too. Self-care is not, that's the cool thing about it, is that self-care, it's individualized to the person. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, and we should be critical of other people who, made like a different activity. Like exactly. I couldn't stand to knit or crochet, but what's those people that do it? Looks like a great thing
good for
do.
them.
So yeah.
And the ladies whose nails are always done, that's awesome too. I bite mine, so but I agree with that philosophy on self-care. There should be no stigma to it.
No.
Whatever makes you feel good. Yep. I love that. So will you talk about your book, Dancing with Lewy, just a little bit more?
Sure. So as I said, after my dad passed away, I kept some notes, and I had a couple writings that he had done and my aunt had done about the family. But it took 6 years, and I decided to start writing a blog. So I sat down and I went off by myself 2 days. I just wrote. And then I turned the blog into a book, which is kind of tricky. I don't know if I'd recommend that. But so I thought, well, blog is only so many people. I'm going to write a book. So I wrote the book, and I started with his life when he was young. I incorporated a lot of his original poetry. We have tons of poems that my dad wrote. I just wanted people to see, here was this man who was a World War II veteran, who owned his own business, raised 4 daughters, and this horrible thing happened to his brain. And I think it was happening years before we knew. And I'm just like, my dad had such changes, and why did he have such changes, and why did he behave these certain ways? And, looking back, I think, his dementia was kind of creeping on for years, and then, how I as a caregiver went, dads and daughters are another kind of phenomena. And as my stepson said, so are sons and moms. But, he didn't want his daughters telling him what to do. He didn't. And one time he pointed at me, because I was kind of the administrative one who handled his money and handled the paperwork. He pointed at me, goes, ask the bossy one, and it's like, he didn't like that. But, what choice did I have? He'd asked me to take care of his checkbook. He couldn't do it. He'd racked up thousands of dollars of high credit card debt. So I wrote about this, and it was kind of a balance of how many family stories you tell and not. And I worked with my sisters, and, the book came to be right smack in the middle of 2020 during COVID. The book came out.
No, I think that's great though. And I really like that you use your experiences in your book, caring for your dad, and that you're willing to share that vulnerability of Dad was pissed when I was taking
Oh
care
yeah.
of him.
Yeah.
And that's such a reality. I know, like, with my dad, if there's something going on with him and I tell him, like, you have to take care of that, Dad, which he doesn't have, like, a lot of health concerns, but
Yeah.
when something comes up, I will tell him.
Yeah.
And, I'm at the point with my dad now where he understands that I am not a child. I am a 36-year-old woman. I am a mother with 2 special needs kids. And he, I think he has a lot of pride and a lot of respect for me.
Yeah.
Last time I saw him, he just, once my kids were done with their meltdowns and they went inside and were calm, he comes over with a beer for me, like, here, you need this.
Yeah.
So, we're like, not that long ago, he was like, no, I don't think you've earned the right to drink beer yet,
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, you're only 36. Yeah.
Yeah, even though I was, like, in my 20s, in my late 20s, and still, like, you haven't earned that yet. But now it's, like, with what I deal with on a daily basis, Dad's like, you deserve this.
Well, it's kind of funny. My dad, after my mom died, my aunt and I had taken him out west to see family, and he was pretty far along the dementia, but he could still walk, and he had his own room. My aunt, he was in bed at night, so we're like, let's go across, and get a drink, and talk. We've been taught much, and this morning, I saw your aunt sneaking out of the hotel to go get a drink. Like, really, Dad? And then the next night he goes, did both of you sneak out? And we just laughed. I mean, we're in our 50s and 60s, and we're like laughing because, here we're sneaking out. Just mostly because we want to have some, lady talk, girl talk.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was kind of funny.
And that's an important part of self-care too, is like just having time with a friend or a relative and just sitting down, having a glass of wine or a cocktail, whatever, and just this is what's going on and just talking about your life. That's, to me, that's an important part of self-care that can be so underrated too.
Right, yeah.
But it really is. So thank you so much for sharing about that book. So I also want you to talk about your book, Remarkable Caregiving. So
once I wrote Dancing with Louie, I thought, well, I know what to do. I know how to get the proofreading, the editing, and all this. And I have worked with a hybrid publisher who were wonderful. So I could write a second book. What am I doing? It's COVID, and I was working from home. So I interviewed 6 different caregivers in various situations, just to get their perspective, what kind of creative solutions do they come up with? What do they recommend? And 2 of the stories are about parents with children. One, he was born just with multiple kind of physical disabilities. His esophagus didn't reach his stomach, and, his spine was crooked, just multiple things that they called it Bader syndrome, which is like multiple birth defects, but they didn't really know what it was. And then the other one was a family with a Down syndrome son. And that one more focused on, what to do with him when he became an adult, how to let him live independently, yet he couldn't be independent. And then 4 of the stories are about either people taking care of their parents. The first one is about a woman and not getting the legal documents in order, and she had a big disaster with that. Couple Parkinson's story. One was about a man whose best friend got Parkinson's, rather young in his 50s, and how he was like the relief pitcher, he called himself. So, and then a couple other stories about taking care of parents. So I think it's just a heartwarming story. I've also used it a little bit like with my church to talk about, how can faith communities support caregivers in their congregations. I hope to expand on that a little bit because, the government doesn't take care of everybody. Sometimes people don't have family members, or the family members need support.
Yeah, or there's a lack of resources.
Yeah. So it's
there's those people who are just over the line, and there's that lack of resources. That's actually really interesting, and I'd like to talk more about that with you later. Mm-hmm. Because I find that a very interesting topic, and I think that that's something that I personally, I think a lot of families feel that way though, especially when you have special needs children, or even like my grandmother with her dementia. It got to the point where taking her to church was more of a project than a reward for her, as much as she loved church, getting her in and out of the car and things like that. And I don't, it was hard to get her access to things that were important to her as a Catholic, like communion and things like that.
Right. Yeah.
So, there's definitely that lack, and it's not so much that they're maybe that there doesn't necessarily want to be, but maybe the congregation, like you said, just doesn't know how to approach caregiving for people in the congregation that need it. I would love to hear more about that in the future because I just am fascinated by that topic. So,
yeah, I'd love to do a session with you on that.
And again, I think that, like I said before, I think that spiritual aspect of caregiving for the caregiver and the person they care for is so important in quality of life, and that, that's something that I'm always trying to find a way to elaborate on and make better. So is there anything else that you wanted to share with us, with my audience?
I think one of my biggest messages to people is be prepared. I mean, if your parents are getting older, realize, some point they live long enough, they're going to be medically fragile. Whether they get dementia or if they get cancer, they just, have trouble getting around. Try to do things. Get their legal paperwork in mind. That's like my number one piece of advice to people. And you can do that hopefully before, there's a crisis. Think about their housing situation. Maybe they want to stay in their house, but maybe you can, help with handrails in the bathtub or shower. Maybe you can help with better lighting, or, try to move the wash and dryer upstairs. That's what we want to do for my parents, but we never were really able to manage that. So, and if, like with your children, I'm sure you try to look ahead. They're going to be older, they're going to be teenagers. How can I be prepared, as they get older, to help them learn, to help them adapt? So just, don't expect the worst, but try to think ahead a little bit to what you can do.
Exactly. And I love that. And I love, the planning for the next step. The next step is 5 or 10 years away, or it could be next week. We don't know sometimes. But planning for that next step, planning for the future, it doesn't necessarily mean you're panicking. It means you're preparing. There is a difference between the two. It doesn't mean you're thinking the worst. It means you're getting ready for whatever it is that's to come. And I just love that. Nancy, can you just let my audience know where they can find you and more information on your works?
Yeah, so I have a website, nancyrpoland.com. That can lead you. You can get my newsletter that I send out every month, Caring for the Caregiver. I have a pre-downloadable worksheet that can help you get documents in order. There's free caregiving resources for caregivers, and also information on both my books. And my books can also be ordered from Amazon and other places that sell books online.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nancy. Again, I really appreciate you coming on. I'm so happy to talk about Lewy body disease, and I feel like we might have another collaboration coming up in the future.
I love it.
So I think I would really, again, when, with the spiritual stuff and the congregation stuff, I'd love to have you back to talk about that more.
That'd be great. I wish you the very best. I just love that you're doing these podcasts and you're reaching out to people and sharing information. It's just great.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And with that will wrap up this week's episode of Caregiver Chronicles. You can find us if you have any questions, concerns, or comments about this episode. You can find us at caregiverchroniclespod@gmail.com. That is our email. Please reach out. We are on Facebook, Caregiver Chronicles. We are on Instagram, Caregiver Chronicles 2. And we are on Twitter, Caregiver Chron 1. Feel free to reach us out there. You can find Nancy's website linked in our show notes. If you liked this episode and you know someone who needs to hear it, share it with a friend. If you feel like this episode really resonated with you, there's something really important or special in here, please feel free to leave us a rating or review. That helps us out a lot. And we want to thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.